Have you ever felt like you just can't play as well in a game as you do at practice? Have you ever felt like when it comes time for the game or competition that your mind and your body just don't feel right? Have you ever walked away from a competition feeling like you just didn't get the most out of yourself in that moment? Well, if any of these things apply to you, you may actually be struggling with something that's happening before the competition even starts: performance anxiety. So today, I'm going to break down the 15 signs of performance anxiety that may be crushing your performance before you even get started. Today, we're going to get better. Hey, welcome back to Train with Perk. If you're new here and you're looking for the best mental performance tools, advice, and tactics, then make sure that you hit the subscribe button and that notification bell so that way you'll know the next time that I drop a video just like this one. All right, so let's talk about performance anxiety. This is arguably one of the most common things that I get asked about and also that I work with my athletes and performers on. So again, if you're one of those people who's struggling with any one of these things that I'm going to discuss and that I'm going to break down for you, please understand again that you are not alone, okay? And there is absolutely a pathway forward, but it starts with being able to recognize that it's happening in the first place, all right? So let's dive in. All right, so first sign of performance anxiety is an athlete who would rather be at practice than at a game, okay? And this is really made up of two parts. The first part is, I alluded to that in the intro, right? An athlete that has a much easier time performing well in practice, right, than their ability to take that performance to a game, right? It's a huge sign of performance anxiety. A byproduct of that is oftentimes an athlete that'll say that they're not really a big fan of like competitions, right? Or they don't like playing in games. They'll often credit that to, you know, just a distaste or a dislike for competition, right? Well, it's really not competition that they don't like. What they really don't like is how competition feels, right? And that's where that performance anxiety comes in, okay? So again, if you hear an athlete or if you're an athlete and you tend to like practice or you do better in practice than you do a game, many times that's just due to performance anxiety. Number two is you play really tight or stiff, okay? This is another huge common one, right? When we feel anxiety, right, that creates a lot of stress. And stress is nothing more than the hormone cortisol being dumped into the brain. And when we experience more cortisol, what that tends to do is our muscles are going to tighten up, right? Our body is saying, I need to get as much blood and oxygen to the heart and to the lungs as I can, right? Well, what does that do, right? That's a fear response. And what that does is that takes a lot of that blood away from your extremities, right? Because your limbs are tightening up. So you see a lot of athletes who maybe they come out in a game and they're really, really anxious. They play a lot stiffer, right? The movements aren't as smooth, that sort of thing, okay? Huge sign of performance anxiety there. Just athletes who tend to play stiff, or they say that they're playing stiff or that they feel tight, okay? Huge sign. All right, so the third sign is you avoid taking risks or you tend to play really passively, okay? This is a huge sign. When I sit down with an athlete and I talk to them about, okay, tell me about how your approach changes in your sport. Many times they'll say, listen, I tend to sit back, right? I don't want the ball, or I don't want the opportunity, or I don't want to be put in that situation, right? They tend to sit back. They tend to play a lot more passively, right? They don't want to take as many risks, right, that are necessary. Right now, we don't want to be terribly risky and we don't want to be overly aggressive, right? But almost always, it is far better to play a sport with an aggressive, more attack mode style mindset, whether that's a team sport or an individual sport, right? It really doesn't make much of a difference there. You have to be able to be aggressive, right? The healthy amount of aggression, the brain, you know, I'm not going to get into the science of it, but the brain just fires a lot better that way. So if you're an athlete and you tend to play a little bit more passive, right? Maybe some of these bigger situations, or you tend to avoid risks, right? We all need to be able to take calculated risks in our sport, right? If you tend to do either of those two things, huge sign of performance anxiety, maybe on the front end of that. So number four is what I call an athlete that tends to over control their performance. Now, what do I mean by this, right? Well, here's the thing. Any athlete, right, whether you're an individual sport athlete, such as a figure skater or a gymnast, right, and you have very precise movements, or a team sport athlete like a basketball player, or maybe you're a quarterback, right, on a football team or whatever it is, right? If you start to over control a lot of those movements that are necessary, right? Think a golfer with a golf swing, or a figure skater with a double axel, or a quarterback trying to make a throw, okay? A huge sign of performance anxiety is the tendency to try and over control that performance, right? A tendency to over control those movements. And that creates a lot of errors, right? Maybe you make mistakes, right, in your motor program or those motor movements that you weren't making before, okay? Huge sign of performance anxiety, just that overall tendency to try and over control something that you've repped out thousands of times in practice, and something that probably should be fairly automatic, right? When we try and over control an automatic movement, right, what happens? Errors happen, right? We all know what that looks like. We've all been there, okay? So a tendency to over control one's performance, right? That's the fourth sign of performance anxiety. All right, number 5 is pretty simple here. It's a hard time catching your breath, okay? And this goes back to that stress, right? This is more of a physiological response, how your body feels. Anytime that you're walking into a performance and you're having a hard time catching your breath, right? You're having a hard time taking in enough air, right? Just feeling like those lungs are filling up. Or maybe you feel like you're hyperventilating, okay? Anything like that, right, would be a huge sign of performance anxiety. Really simple one, really easy one to spot, right? Make sure that you keep an eye out for that. All right, number 6 is future-focused thinking, okay? Now, what is future-focused thinking? Future-focused thinking is that what-if thinking, right? What might happen? What if I fail? What are people going to think, okay? A huge impact of emotions in general is that they take our mind out of the moment and they'll drag us either into the past or into the future. So when you think about anxiety, right, where's anxiety gonna take us, right? Usually we're gonna have concerns about what's going to happen. Okay? So when we're experiencing that anxiousness and we start getting into that what-if thinking that's just off into the future, all of a sudden now we realize that our mind's no longer in the moment, which means that our mind isn't on task, okay? So if you start to sense that in that moment you find maybe you're a little bit too far ahead of yourself, or you're just drifting off into the future, okay? Sign of performance anxiety, that future focus, that what if thinking. All right, number 7, right? And I'm sure many of you, when you think about performance anxiety, this is the word that comes up, okay? Number 7 is choking, okay? This is one of those buzzwords. And, for the sake of the length of this video, I don't have time to get into, break down choking on like a really in-depth level. If you want me to break down choking, right, what causes it and a few things that maybe could help prevent it, make sure that you leave a comment below and I'll make sure that I get a video out sometime in the future, okay? Sometime in the near future, we'll get that out. But again, when you see an athlete choke, right, and what is choking? Choking is an athlete that goes into a situation and they don't get nearly as much out of their physical ability, out of their technical and tactical ability as they usually do, and they really come up short, right? Oftentimes in a big moment, and those are the worst moments to come up short in, right? I've choked. All of my athletes have absolutely experienced some level of choking, before they came to work with me. It happens, right? But again, choking, a huge, huge sign. And just remember, for the sake of this video, choking is just when you really come up short of your ability in those moments, and that leads to a big, sharp decline in performance. All right, number 8 is the inability to find any momentum, okay? Now, there's so many athletes, and I certainly was one of those athletes, that it's always nice to get off to a fast start, right? It's always nice to kind of feel like you're in the groove, not necessarily in the zone or a flow state, but it's just nice to, get a few things going for you right away, right? Performance anxiety, if anything, it creates a lot of inconsistency, right? And it's really hard to find momentum, right, when we're experiencing that inconsistency. So if you're an athlete and you're saying maybe you're a slow starter, right, or maybe it's just hard to put a few good things together, to string a few just like successes together, right? Well, many times that's because your mind and your body's not in a position to succeed, and many times, as we're talking about today, that may be due to that performance anxiety that you're experiencing on the front end of performance, okay? So if you're an athlete or you're a parent or you're a coach and you start to see, maybe your team or just an individual is having a hard time just kind of getting going, we're struggling with a little bit on the front end there, okay? On the front end of that performance. All right, so if at this point in the video you're thinking, wow, I could really use some help in terms of just how do I prepare, right? Maybe there are a few simple things that you could do that would help you on the front end that would absolutely serve to mitigate some of this performance anxiety. Well, I've got a special gift for you, okay? I want you to go to trainwithperk.com/free guide, okay? I've got 3 simple little things that are easy to install that are absolutely gonna help you feel more prepared for that next big moment, especially if any of these things you've been struggling with, or you're just saying, you know what? I want to elevate my mental game, right? I want to figure out a way to be better, okay? Get over there, trainwithperk.com/free guide. You're going to love it. It's free. It's absolutely going to help. Get over there, get it in your hands. All right, so number 9 is you freeze, okay? And this could look like a couple different things, but most often what I see is we're overthinking, right? And that causes us to freeze, right? That's that paralysis by analysis, okay? That mind starts to overthink, right? And all of a sudden now we're not making quick decisions. We just kind of feel like we're stuck in the mud and our feet won't move, that sort of thing, okay? So if you're an individual, maybe you freeze, right? Either, right away in the competition or at some point, right? That's a huge sign of performance anxiety. Is just that freezing. You just feel like you're paralyzed. You can't make a decision. So the 10th sign of performance anxiety is self-talk changes. Okay, now this could be a variety of different things, right? Most of the time, right, it creates a lot more negative self-talk, right? So maybe our self-talk changes where we become more negative, or we're beating ourselves up, or we get really pessimistic, right? Really negative towards the future. Whatever that may be, you really need to be able to scan and really be aware for yourself, hey, is my self-talk changing here, right? What's that internal narrative? What's that internal story that I'm telling myself, okay? Huge sign, right? If we really start to see that take a negative swing, it could be a huge sign of performance anxiety. All right, the 11th sign is you are way more easily distracted, okay? Now, we've talked a lot about the impact of stress on the body, right? When we feel anxious, we experience more stress. We've said that. We've talked a lot about how that impacts the body, but we also need to talk about how that impacts the mind, right? And when we experience a lot more cortisol or a lot more stress, we're way more likely to kind of have more of a mind that it feels like it's racing, right? That's like a computer that's overheating, okay? And when that happens, it's really, really hard for us to focus on one task. And it's a lot easier for us to be distracted by things that maybe we're not as distracted by before, right? Again, if you want me to do a video on focus, make sure that you leave me a comment below. We can definitely have a conversation on focus, how to be better with it, that sort of thing. But again, if you're experiencing that anxiousness, it's really, really challenging to be able to focus in on one thing, right, in one moment at the right time, and be able to filter out everything else that we need to. All right, so the 12th sign, we're almost there. The 12th sign of performance anxiety is that you fail to see things clearly, okay? This is a huge thing, right? The inability to see things clearly, again, a huge impact of stress on the mind, right, is our ability to process information, okay? And if we're not seeing things clearly, what does that lead to? That leads to the inability to make really, really quick and timely and just good decisions, right? So if you're a person where maybe you get in those moments and you start in the anxiousness starts to kick up, or you start to feel that pressure, and all of a sudden we make a bad pass, or we make a bad decision, right? Or we make an error, right? Or we fall, or we stumble, or we just make a mistake, right? And it's a mistake that we don't really normally do that, okay? A lot of times that comes from just the way that we're seeing things underneath that stress, right? And that also has a really big impact on the kind of decisions that we're able to make. All right, number 13 is you tend to be more emotionally reactive than you usually are, right? We talked a lot about emotions. I've got a whole video on emotions. I'll leave that in a card right up there for you to go back and look at. But again, if we're experiencing that anxiousness, we're gonna be way more reactive just in general to the emotions that we're feeling, right? We're gonna feel them bigger, right? They're gonna feel more real, right? And they're gonna try and influence the things that we're able to do and the actions that we're able to take that much more, okay? So if you're somebody who, maybe usually you're not that emotionally reactive, but in certain situations you are, especially when it comes to your sport, we might be, talking about that performance anxiety that's happening on the front end, okay? So make sure that it's a really easy way to become more aware. If you feel like you're just a little bit more reactive to how you're feeling, all right, huge sign of performance anxiety. All right, the 14th sign is making a mistake has a really big impact on you, okay? And again, making a mistake is never fun, it's never enjoyable to do, right? But we absolutely have to be able to learn how to handle that. And if we're just in this, big state of anxiousness, right, either before or during a competition, any mistake that we make is going to feel that much worse. It's going to feel that much bigger. It's going to feel like it has that much more of a negative impact, okay? And if that's you, and maybe in certain situations, mistakes, it is what it is. We're going to move on. We're going to move forward. But in other situations, you're like, wow, I just made a terrible, terrible mistake. It's the worst thing ever. That's a huge sign that we're maybe just a little bit too anxious in those situations. All right, the 15th and final sign of performance anxiety that may be impacting negatively your performance is worried about what other people think. Okay, this over focus on, you know, what are my teammates going to think? What are my friends going to think? What are my parents going to think? What are my coaches going to think? Right? What are people back home going to think? What are grandpa and grandma going to think? Right? If you're one of those people and you get into kind of these situations where you're feeling more pressure, and with that pressure is coming some anxiety, right? Many times that leads to just being overly focused on what the people around you are thinking. And again, if our focus is someplace other than in the moment, on task, where it needs to be, we're really going to have a hard time finding, right, that consistent performance. All right, so there you have it, 15 signs of performance anxiety that may be crushing your performance before you even get started. If you liked the video, give me a thumbs up. Make sure that you hit that subscribe button and that notification bell. And of course, get over there to trainwithperk.com/free guide to get your hands on that 100% free guide. I think it's really gonna help you. We'll see you next time.